our international order, things that we took for granted about the way the world works and democracies are being challenged. I think now you have sort of the rise of China and its influence in the world is something new that many people are dealing with, and just the changes in our worlds, where the UN just showed how 1 million species are threatened with extinction over the next few years. And so these are massive global trends that really sort of demonstrate that there's also this rise of a new era. I don't know if anyone's heard of the term anthropocene, but it's an era of time. It's a geological era that many scientists believe we are now in, where it is about how we as humans are changing this planet in ways that are unprecedented. And so there's this whole idea that we are in a new era in our world, and that this idea of there's now increasing wicked problems. So we all are facing problems. They're simple, those are the easy ones to solve. Complex, those are more challenging. And then there's this idea of a wicked problem where it's ambiguous, it's chaotic, there is really no great solution. And so when we think about things like climate change and the extinction of our species and forced migrations, and how all of those are introducing elements into our societies and our nations and our world that we don't have answers for, those are all these wicked problems. And so, I think when we think about Ethiopia and these global trends, really, we talked about it a lot already today, and how it's really in a position to lead. You have a government that is committed to science and technology and innovation. It was great to hear the ministers this morning talk about how important some of these issues are in this meeting is, and how they're really looking for answers and recommendations from this group. And so that just shows the government is willing to listen. You have sort of economic reforms that are going on, development plans from the government, and then, not even taking into account the Nobel Peace Prize, where the eyes of the world are on Ethiopia, but things like the commitment recently to plant all the trees, that reverberated around the world and really casts Ethiopia in such a bright light. And so, I think that when we think about the challenges that this agenda put forward, and the 10 challenges for today, yes, they are Ethiopia's challenges, but they're also challenges that the rest of the world are facing. And so, whether it's transportation or food security or energy demand, these are challenges that many nations are facing. And I think that when we think about how to get to success in those, there are some enablers that you can, that help to maybe develop the solutions to those challenges. And so I'm just going to talk about 4 of those, thinking about the global momentum, again, that everyone is facing similar challenges, thinking about the science policy interface and how important it is, advancing work at the intersections, and then training the next generation. So we've already heard about the Sustainable Development Goals today. 2015, the world came together to come up with these 17 goals that every country is going to strive to meet in general for the sustainability of our planet and the prosperity of our people. And science, technology, and innovation really play a role in various ways when you're looking at these sustainable development goals. So science, technology, and innovation is not one of them, but they are, it's needed to think about what the targets are and what the goals are. It's needed to think about sort of a system approach to solving them. And then also the risks when it comes to things like AI and how emerging technologies impact these goals and international collaboration. All of those are sort of a part of how science plays a role in the Sustainable Development Goals. And I just thought I would point out, if you look at just the overlap of what these goals are that the world committed to and the agenda that we have today and tomorrow, there's so much overlap in the topics in general. And so there's a lot of efforts around the international community to think about science and technology solutions to these Sustainable Development Goals. There are reports that are being written often through the academies or through other international institutions that are highlighting science's and technology's role in solving the challenges, but also policy making. There are also these fora that exist right now. There's the Science and Technology and Innovation Forum, the African Science, Technology, and Innovation Forum, and then the UN Solution Summit. And all of these are really looking at those goals and trying to get scientists and technologists to come up with solutions. And so some of them have sort of challenges, and some of them bring in startups that are all designed to tackle one of those goals. And so there's this whole ecosystem right now that exists in the world where they're all having conversations again around these grand challenges. And just to point out for Ethiopia, Ethiopia was part of a review that the UN did about where they are in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And we already heard in the last session that maybe not on target, but the reality is the world is not on target. There was just a report that said that no one is going to meet these goals. So, but one thing that's interesting to keep an eye on is that the UN and the World Bank are developing roadmaps for how countries can come up with policies to help to get to those targets and to those goals. And I won't read all of this, of what the roadmaps consist of, but Ethiopia is one of the 5 countries in which this is going to be piloted. And so over the course of the next year or so, that should be an interesting process to watch. So moving to the science policy interface, and if you think about sort of the policy making process, that sort of shows the different steps, where you have agenda setting, or figuring out what the problem is, coming up with policies, and that's a list of options of what to do about that problem, actually implementing that, and then evaluating it. And so in order for science and technology to play a role in this process, really need to think about the interface and how you bring in that technical expertise into that process. And so you need technical professionals who are able to translate the complex ideas to policymakers and the public. One of the speakers earlier said, explain it to me like your grandma. You need your grandma to understand this concept. So it's that idea of having technical professionals that can speak that language. You need policymakers who actually value evidence and technical input. And it was really encouraging, again, to hear sort of Ethiopian ministers said that this is what they're interested in and they're looking for. And you really need this enabling environment of strong leadership, trust, information flow, and sort of an independence from special interests. And so when you think about all the different people that play a role in this policy interface, it's from the governments to international organizations, to nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, the private sector, and individuals being even people on the ground, citizens who don't have any technical expertise. Everyone has some sort of role to play, and I think many of the different sectors are represented in this room. And so just an example of people who are doing this work, I see the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences, Professor Sige is here, actually was able to take part in a workshop that the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences partnered with the International Network of Government Science Advice, which was held on a whole workshop on how to think about skill sets and building skills for being able to translate science to policymakers. So outside of the Ethiopian academies, there are networks of academies of science, there's the World Academy of Science, there's think tanks. Ethiopian has Ethiopian Development Research Institute. And I'm sorry to put Obama on there, I know he's not Ethiopian, but it just represents that he's there with his President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And so this is a body that the US government has that the President has scientists and engineers that advise him on multiple topics of interest. And so when you have a leader that values sort of scientific input in this policy making, I think good things happen, and so that's just why I put that on there. One quick note is just that science and technology can't really solve all the problems, and I'm sorry if this is a sensitive topic, but you know, I think that the situation that's going on with the dam right now shows that it's really not about a technological solution to getting energy to Ethiopia. There are so many dimensions and challenges that it's not about the technology, it's about this whole system of problems, and that's why that's really important. And I'm running low on time, but I'm going to try to speed up. So The third sort of bucket of maybe enablers is really thinking about this research that transcends boundaries. And so you have disciplinary fields, then you have multidisciplinary, which is really just taking those disciplines and working together. There's this idea of interdisciplinary and how these work together, and then transdisciplinary. And we already talked about how all of the different grand challenges in this meeting are not just individual disciplines, they're not just individual topics, but how important they are to consider together. So, talked about the food, water, energy, water nexus, and how important it is to consider all of those things. But again, like when you think about sort of climate change or social change and how that might change that whole dynamic that exists between how water and energy and food are related, that's a whole other set of the wicked challenge and wicked problem. But you can't really consider all of these things separately, you must consider them together. Planetary health is just another example of how what happens in the environment impacts animals and humans and how those things are all interlinked as well. And so just important to think about this transdisciplinary nature, and if you link back to this idea of human capital, how are we training our students, how are we training our professionals to think about working across disciplines and working with people who have different training than them. And then the fourth is the importance of the next generation. I think this is like the fourth time you guys have seen some version of this, so I don't have to explain it. But the demographic shifts that are happening in Ethiopia are important to think about on multiple levels. And so another model of grand challenges that exists sort of from the US perspective is from the National Academy of Engineering. And they set out in 2008 to think about what the grand challenges in engineering are. And I just highlighted the ones that, again, align really well with the agenda for Ethiopia 2050. And so what this grand challenge for engineering is, it's a change in the mindset of how you train engineers. And so rather than, I was a chemical engineer in undergrad, rather than just thinking about chemical engineering and the training that I would get there, I would rather think about, for example, making solar energy economical. And so like that would be the framing of how I was trained or my research. And that just means that my work is being related to some societal challenge. And so, you know, one question is, can Ethiopia think about a way where it's educating its students not by traditional ways of disciplinary sort of education, but around these grand challenges to really help students understand how they can make a difference. And so there are multiple programs I won't talk about that are really out there now, and I think what's really exciting is this idea about Africa for Africans, and there are so many different opportunities for African scientists to get the leadership training they need to be the future generation of people who are sitting in the seats where you are now. And so these are just some of them. And then there's also fellowship programs that are, this is one for the ASEAN region, but it's a model of how to get scientists training outside of the lab to give them skill sets they need to sort of, again, fix these grand challenges. And so something to think about